So I've tried to explain to people lately why my faith has suddenly blossomed more than it ever has, and it's stronger than it's ever been. And it has nothing to do with the end of the world. It has nothing to do with the tribulation. It has nothing to do with the rapture. It has everything to do with archaeology, history, science, um, and then tying those back to the Bible as a proof, not using the Bible on its own, but using other things. It's an approach I've been working on lately. But my working theory is that people that were close enough to Jesus to smell him as they stood in the shadow of the temple 2,000 years ago, they hear Jesus say, "Tear this temple down, and I will rebuild it in 3 days." And the people are looking up at the temple and they're looking at Jesus, and he was a carpenter, so I'm assuming he was probably pretty built, but they're like, there's no way. And if you play a thought game for a second, what if God comes down and he talks to those Jews and he says, yes or no, is Jesus going to rebuild the temple in 3 days? And everybody would have said no. But then they would have been wrong because Jesus was talking about a different temple. He was talking about the temple of his body. So, Lord, are you now going to restore your kingdom? I mean, as Jesus is getting ready to go up into heaven, his disciples, who again have smelled him for 3-ish years, seen him die, see him come back to life, and they still don't get it. Lord, are you now going to restore your kingdom? My point is if you have people 2,000 years ago who spoke the language, who understood the culture, who understood the difference in worldview, I mean, science, everything, they understood things completely differently. So if they didn't understand everything, what makes us think that we have any right to take a hard stand on anything? I don't think we do, other than a logical thought process that there has to be some type of a force, an organizing force, an intelligent force, a designer, because of the complexity of DNA. There's just no way, from an organic chemistry perspective, that you can have life start from nothing. There's no way. There's too many things that are completely opposite needs. I can prove that Jesus is a historical figure by using atheists. And they will admit there was a Jesus. They will admit that there's a good many parts of the New Testament that are genuine and even earlier than most people would accept. And they agree that something funky happened around his death. So there's a Jesus who lived, and we've used our dating system and everything in Western civilization. I mean, it was a fundamental change. The Judeo-Christian worldview changed everything in what would become Western civilization, the Western world. So he was somebody. And you might think, okay, fine, so what? How does that apply to me? Because when we die, we just turn into worm food. And that was a possible assumption. However, there's been this science experiment that's been known since 1811. It's called the double slit experiment. And it tries to determine whether whether a light is a wave or if it's a particle. And depending on what you decide to do, it changes the results of the experiment. In other words, your consciousness can affect the outcome of an experiment that is not in the room with you on a completely different continent, and you can go forwards and backwards in time. We are talking minuscule amounts here, but this is all literal science. So if your consciousness is clearly separate from your body, which it clearly is, because you can have an effect on something that you can't see, touch, smell, or hear. So our consciousness has the ability to impact things outside of our own body. And I think it's the second law of thermodynamics that says energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So your consciousness is an energy, and it is not unreasonable to assume maybe there is something afterwards. Now, I'm still not saying that Jesus Christ is the way. I'm leading you down a thought process that is a thought experiment. There's been some things that have come together for me recently, and one of them is Joe Rogan's podcast with Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. And they have a completely different way of looking at archaeology and geology and all this other stuff. They have some very, very convincing arguments. Let me take a step back. I don't buy evolution. I don't buy evolution's timelines. The carbon-14 dating that they use is unreliable at best, and it also does not take into account solar activity that happens on a regular basis. So carbon-14 is out. I don't know how old the Earth is, and I don't care how old the Earth is because it doesn't really matter. The age of the Earth does not affect where I'm headed with this. If we play devil's advocate for a second, okay, let's say that Jesus is the literal Son of God. There is an earthquake that happened, as the Bible says. They found it. They've dated it, 33 AD. There's been so much that has come out lately that all of it proves the Bible. There is I think it's the Mount Hermon curse tablets, which is mentioned in Joshua. They literally found it. This curse tablet, I think it was lead or silver or something, very small, and it was in a garbage dump that some archaeologists were allowed to go through, and they found this, and it kind of proves that Joshua is right on top of accuracy. Jericho was unknown until it was found by people that were digging around the Bible. The Bible has a reason for people to think that it has some authenticity, as it is one of the best researched, it's one of the best preserved books going back a long time. Now, have people messed with it? I don't know, probably. And that's where I go back to my first point about Jesus specifically says, when he's talking to Thomas, he says, "You believe because you see, but blessed are those who don't see and still believe." That's this generation. If God is who we think he is, if he knows what we think he knows, and if we continue afterwards, then he has to take those kinds of things into consideration. But there's a lot more that I've started learning lately. And I'm going to go ahead and leave that, I think, for a different video. But I'm going to sum up real quick. I believe that you can prove that the universe had to have a cause, it had to have a designer. I think you can prove that Jesus Christ was a real and literal historical person, and something funky happened around his death. That's absolutely provable. I can prove that your consciousness can affect things outside of your body, things you can't see, you can't touch, you can't smell. And if energy can be neither created nor destroyed, then there's a reason to think that your consciousness may go on after death. If your consciousness goes on after death, then all of a sudden, all of these questions that we write off, well, maybe they're worth considering a little bit. And that's the purpose of this experiment. It isn't to tell you how to think. It is to give you new perspectives at looking at things so that you can make your own decisions. I think this is one of the most important questions that people could ever ask. And there's so much going on in the world right now. And there are people that I love and I care for that are having struggles with faith that I never dreamed of. And so I figure it's time for me to start opening my mouth. So that's where I am for right now as to why I think things matter. I hope some of this was interesting and informative. And he who has ears to hear and all that other stuff. Thanks.